everyone, welcome back to Invested, where we talk about wealth as being more than just money. Our partners Paul Rand, Joel Rand, and Sarah Minikari will bring in guests and industry thought leaders to chat about meaningful topics on personal finances, health and wellness, ideas for your business, tax planning, and other key issues that impact our lives and our livelihood. So thank you for joining us, and we hope you find our discussions not only practical and educational, but maybe sometimes a little thought-provoking. With that, let's get to the episode.
Hi, and welcome back to Invested. On today's episode, we had a great opportunity to dive into a topic that has the world abuzz: artificial intelligence. Sarah and I were extremely lucky to have a chance to speak with Ashley Oerth, a senior investment strategy analyst at Invesco, where she is part of the global market strategy office. Ashley and her colleagues have recently published an excellent series of white papers on the topic of artificial intelligence, and we felt very fortunate she was able to spend some time with us and share some of her insights. In the episode, we talk with Ashley about AI's recent skyrocketing popularity, the current capabilities of AI, what to expect from upcoming developments in the field of artificial intelligence, and we also discuss balancing the potential benefits with some of the potential risks associated with the proliferation of AI applications. In her role at Invesco, Ashley develops and communicates economic outlooks with investment insights, with a particular focus on macroeconomic analysis. Additionally, she researches and creates thought leadership pieces to help articulate the firm's thematic viewpoints. Ms. Oerth's insights have been featured in publications including Bloomberg, Financial Times, Business Insider, Trends Magazine, and the Japan Times. She also has been previously published in the Journal of Investing. Ashley began her career with Oppenheimer Funds in 2016, where she worked with the investment strategy team and joined Invesco when the firm combined with Oppenheimer in 2019. Previously, she worked at High Frequency Economics as a research coordinator. She earned a BA degree in economics and political studies from Bard College at Simon's Rock in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, and she also completed the Bard Globalization and International Affairs program as part of her studies. She is also a Chartered Financial Analyst, or CFA. With that, let's get to our talk with Ashley Oerth from Invesco. Hi, and welcome back to Invested. Today we're speaking with Ashley Oerth, a Senior Investment Strategy Analyst with Invesco. Thank you, Ashley, for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and joining us from the UK. So it's good morning our time, good evening your time. So appreciate you making a space for us.
Across the pond.
Yeah, it's across the pond. It's coffee time for us, tea time for you, I guess.
I actually am having tea.
Ah, well, there you go. So we're here to talk about AI, and we've been doing another series of podcasts on alternative investments, which for a while was called AI, and now we have to change that and call that alts. We can't at all refer to that as AI now. So, but artificial intelligence, it's been around for a while. This is really nothing new, although you would think it's something brand new. But there's been a lot of stuff in the news, obviously. And just looking at the evolution of it, we've gone from spell checking to grammar checking, and now we can take some words and put it into an input and actually get a letter or a paper. Although some would argue there are some significant flaws that show up with some of that data when it comes through. But it's been dominating the news since ChatGPT came out in November of last year. And it kind of seems like we can't get away from the topic. And so whether that's, hey, it's coming up in the writer's strike, or it's in news stories about deep fakes, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about the future of AI and some of the precarious things that it can get into. Or commercials that just talk about how AI has improved this product or is involved in the making of this product and into the marketing of certain products. So before we get into kind of the nitty gritty of how does it work and where are we going and how do we invest, can you just kind of give us an overview of your take on AI and how you define it and how we should look at it? And, we kind of think the term artificial intelligence is very, very broad. And so how do we narrow it down and kind of figure out what it is we're talking about?
Sure. And that's exactly right. I do think that AI is unfortunately a very vague term. I think that at its core, if we were to try to define it, it's really about just mimicking some kind of intelligent, or in other words, human process. So this word AI, not alternative investments, but artificial intelligence, it's really used interchangeably today for everything from voice assistants to product and content recommendation, to even your refrigerator telling you that you're out of milk. So, with the launch of ChatGPT late last year, AI now also means being able to interact with and instruct really a system that's capable of generating these sort of rich, unique, and topical responses. And that's where we find today's generative AI craze, which is, again, really embodied by the launch of ChatGPT, but really there's so many other models out there today.
Yeah. And, we do want to get into the predictive nature of all that and what it does and how it works. But one of the things I found interesting is if you go into ChatGPT and you ask the same question a couple of different ways, it's not like you get the exact same response every time. Why is that?
Yeah, and I think this is part of what's like really great about interacting with it, that it makes it feel almost human to interact with, is that like you said, it's not giving you sort of like a pre-formatted response for every question you ask it. Rather, it sort of gives this impression of creativity. And what's really going on in the background is that it was trained on a huge amount of data, that it sort of has formed an understanding of which concepts are connected to which. And when you ask it a question, it's sort of activating parts of its brain to sort of say, okay, which word is going to come next? But it's not going to say which word in particular, but rather what are the possible words that may follow. And so there's sort of like a dice roll that's happening each time that says, okay, there's a probability that this will be the next word or that, and so on and so forth. And that's how we get these sorts of rich and varied responses that we get from it. And I think that's, part of the genius of it is that, again, you can have, a prompt that says, write me an email, and it'll give you a few different versions of that email with each time you ask it. So I think it can be quite helpful from the creative aspect of exactly, what you may be using it for.
And can you just touch on the difference between narrow AI and generative AI and LLMs, which is large language models, right? And like just some of those we love abbreviating everything. So some of those topics and names and abbreviations.
That's the name of the game. It's alphabet soup, right? Yeah. So with let's start with narrow AI. So the distinction between narrow AI and sort of like general or all-purpose AI is that narrow AI is really something that's created for a particular task or a particular process. It's really about trying to solve a problem that you give it. Or a problem that has been constructed and then the AI built around that problem. So you can think of that AI as sort of like a solution for that. It has a narrow use case. This general AI is really the stuff of science fiction. So if you think of like Jarvis from Iron Man or Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey, it's really this AI that is sort of almost free thinking. It's almost a sentient intelligence in many ways. And that's really still the realm of science fiction. We're nowhere near that kind of level of tech. And I don't know when we may be. But for the purpose of the world we're working in today, we're really still in that narrow AI realm. Maybe that's some kind of comfort for us all.
Yeah, right.
So the next part of that, so going on to the alphabet soup. So these LLMs, or large language models, it's really just a catch-all way of describing these various generative AI models like ChatGPT and like others from other tech companies that they're taking huge amounts of data. And again, going through that process where they try to have what amounts to a machine understand it. And based on that understanding, it's able to, be interacted with, similar to our experience with, for example, ChatGPT. So LLMs is really just a broad category that we can stuff all of these generative AI models, at least from the perspective of dealing with language, because LLM is a large language model. That's just an umbrella term, if you will. And then there's another part to your question. I apologize.
No, I just think, one of the things that we were talking about earlier, Sarah and I, were, so why did this come out so fast? I mean, it just seemed to explode onto the news networks and everywhere all of a sudden.
Because the reality is, AI has been around forever. Let's think back to when we were kids, or when I was a kid, playing chess on our computers. I mean, that's AI. It's, predictive responses and playing a game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of AI in a lot of ways as sort of being kind of like a flow chart in some way, that like you sort of have this range of possibilities and you're giving it an input and it's supposed to process that data that you've given it and do something with it. But of course, in today's environment, we sort of have exploded that into so much data with so much sophistication in the way it's processed that it's become obviously much more complex than just playing a chess game, but today is able to understand, languages or images or more. So obviously, with saying all this, we have a long history that underlies this. So when we look at generative AI today, it feels like it came out sort of all of a sudden, that it just hit the limelight, and it's all we've been hearing about in 2023. But it really, I think, betrays the history that is built up to this moment, that we've had these successive improvements in not just the models that underlie the artificial intelligence more generally, but also we've had improvements in computing power and how much data we can feed to these models, such that they've been able to not just become more sophisticated in how the model is run, but also in how it interprets and handles data. So that's really what has built up to this moment. I think, accelerating factor was in 2017 that there was this research paper authored by Google's AI research unit that after that was published, the sort of realm of understanding human language was just blown open, because suddenly we weren't just understanding, each word in a sentence in its sequence, but also able to understand the context in which those words appear. And with that moment, we really were off to the races, and there's just been a breakneck speed of development since. So it's really an exciting time to be seeing these models, but also I think for somebody who's only just seeing it in the presses today, it can feel like it just happened with a bang.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, we know that there's going to be challenges and potentially dangers, but we don't think it's going to take over the world. So let's talk about kind of the differences between, on that data set piece, the differences between learning, thinking, and then between predicting and being creative. Yeah.
So I had a colleague who put it to me as sort of, you're speaking with a clever parrot, that it's able to repeat back to you like the words and sentences, phrases, etc., that it's seen before. But the clever part of it is that it's able to also understand the context component. But at the end of the day, it's not really thinking, which maybe that's an offense to parrots, but we won't go there.
We won't tell them, don't worry.
Yeah, that's all right. I don't have a parrot. So
I don't know. There are some parrots I enjoy talking to more than other people. So yeah.
Well, there's nothing to be found there, right? So really, at the end of the day, these LLMs, these large language models, they're working by understanding, as I mentioned before, sort of the interrelationships of words and concepts and the frequencies with which they appear together. So when you give one of these models a prompt, like you write it a question, it's sort of picking out those different, concepts that it's recognized based on what it was trained on, and sort of, again, activating like parts of its brain that it then uses to sort of, predict the words that follow from that. And so it can give the appearance of intelligence, and it's, I think that I'm sort of understating how powerful it can be. It can truly do some really impressive things. I had it write a poem earlier today in the style of Henry David Thoreau about relaxing by the beach. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is surprisingly like touching. But so it's, I think that its performance can't be understated.
AI made me cry today.
Yeah. I'm sorry?
AI made me cry today.
No, the worst moment was that I had this poem about traffic lights that I saw. This was like one of my true like revelation moments with Gen AI. was that I saw this poem about traffic lights and it sounded absolutely ridiculous. And then I read the poem and I was like, oh my gosh, traffic lights have meaning.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how AI plays into academia because, back in the day, there used to be, what was like the plagiarism site? Like when you were a kid, when you submitted an essay to your teacher, you had to submit it through a plagiarism site to make sure that it was your words.
It's like Turnitin, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
Thank you. It wasn't on the tip of my tongue. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, so I'm curious to see how that's going to kind of change how students and our youth kind of put together their responses to essays and those types of research pieces. When truly they can enter in, write me a poem about stoplights, and voila.
No, I truly think that is an issue to be grappled with, and I don't have the answers of exactly how to do that. But I will say that when you're dealing with responses from something like ChatGPT, that there is a certain hallmark to the way it writes that you can sort of pick up on over time. That you can sort of like get this, I don't know, a kind of eerie feeling to say like, there's something about this that feels off, right? Yeah. So maybe there's a way of building systems, and maybe this is already in the works, that could sort of pick up on those hallmarks that we're, intuitively sensing, that could, similar to how those plagiarism websites, be able to sort of say, okay, this has a high probability of being written by a Gen AI. They can now, of course, it's an arms race. You'll always be able to game the system. Yeah. But that's the world we live in today, isn't it?
Well.
And I kind of see like we've seen new technologies, well, at least those of us that have been around forever, seen new technologies come out. And it seems like there's, we would call it kind of a bullwhip response to that. So there's this hyper, the phenomenon, this euphoria around something new coming out, and it's going to change everything, and it's going to change it radically, and it's going to change it forever. And then there's this sort of lull and period of disappointment when we realize, oh no, it's not going to change everything, and life will go on as we know it for the most part, but it does influence some things. But then there is some later adaptation to that, and it kind of peaks back up again, but just not to that same euphoric level. Where do you think we are in AI or generative AI in that cycle? Are we overhyping it, or is it, are we in that lull? Are we just in the euphoria period?
Yeah, this sounds like, what is it? The Gartner hype cycle is sort of like that stylized bullwhip. Yeah, I think it's a useful framework to approach this kind of like explosive moment where we just are suddenly hearing about it and seeing it everywhere. And I think that with Gen AI, it's really tough to appreciate where we fall into that hype cycle. I think that the sort of input technologies that have enabled it have gone through their own varieties of hype cycles. They've had these sorts of booms and busts periods of euphoria and then just depression. But really, I think that these previous forms of AI as well, we've seen them crop up in all walks of life. That's everything from the way we route like cloud computing to how we approach content recommendation to even driverless cars. There's all sorts of moments that we've sort of been through along the way. And I think that along each one of these steps, we get a bit less disillusioned. All of that said, I do think we're in a period where expectations are really climbing much faster than even the most bullish of earnings estimates can. Yeah. So I think that is a point of concern. But on the flip side, I would say, unlike some previous hype cycles, we do already have meaningful results. We are able to see it yourself. Like seeing is believing, right? And the fact that we can all talk about ChatGPT and similar platforms means that we can just log on, not even have to pay anything really, and be able to access these large language models and play with them and see, with our own eyes or keyboards, that we can actually interact with these and have quite creative, touching even, or impressive outputs. So I think that fact sort of helps, I guess, accelerate us in that hype cycle. That's not only is it a matter of we're excited about this, but we actually have results that underlie it. I think at this point, it's a matter of how we get from that excitement and the proof of concept, which is really what we've been playing with, and then integrate that into products, into our economy in a way that's meaningful and actually, brings forward the sorts of, most optimistic forecasts of what it may do to our lives or productivity and so on and so forth.
And with that hype, I think there are two sides of that hype. There's the fear and greed, right? The fear is, it's going to mean all of these bad things, and I'd like to get your take on that. But then also the greed side, or the benefits and opportunity side, which I think are very real. So what are, as you're going around and presenting, I'm sure you're hearing a lot of these questions. What are some of the things on the fear side that you're hearing?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of fears here. I feel like it's sort of awakened something, deeply human within us, that we're sort of like, oh no, the machines are taking over. And so I think that there's a lot of, questions or fears that stem from that. I would say chief among them is this fear of loss of jobs, that people, fundamentally fear being replaced. And I think that's appreciable after, you play with these sorts of models and see what they're capable of. That you're like, oh my gosh, it wrote a whole paper in 30 seconds, and it took me 30 days.
Right?
And that can sting, right? But of course, there's ways of thwarting that kind of fear. That's while these tools are powerful, and some estimates say they can outcompete some human labor, I'm personally not so worried. For example, despite years of advances in AI preceding Gen AI, we've had all sorts of fears about what it may do to all manners of jobs. Like I said, we have AI on like content recommendation and all sorts of other functions. But we still have today one of the tightest labor markets on record. That people are still finding jobs, and we have many employers saying that it's actually difficult to find people to fill jobs. So I think that we can find some comfort in the fact that economies are, always evolving. They're vibrant things that, even if there's a technology that emerges, we're still able to have everyone, be able to find a job if they're looking for one, right? So I think that is some comfort to me. I would also highlight that Gen AI, for all of its impressive capabilities, does have a lot of shortcomings still. It is prone to making mistakes. It's prone to just making up untruths, the so-called hallucinations. And I think there's some great examples of that. I've read about a story one time with a lawyer who used it to write a legal opinion. And it cited all kinds of case law, but then when a judge was actually reading it, saying none of these cases exist, and that's because it just fabricated all of that.
Yeah.
So,
but it said with enough confidence that it sounds like it's a legit.
Yes, exactly. It speaks with such confidence. It writes with such confidence that it really feels convincing. But at the end of the day, it's something you still need to be wary of. You still need to fact check it.
Right.
And so you can't really write for any listeners out there that are working on like a term paper or something, you can't use it to write your term paper either.
I was talking with my brother, who's a professor of biology, and he logged into ChatGPT and he said, hey, let's give this thing, give me a paper about this. And he said, I started reading it and I was blown away and he said, there's all this research that I haven't seen this research. What, I haven't read that paper. And then he went to go look up the papers and he's like, this is all made up. This is all nonsense.
That's how it's novel research, right?
Yeah, right.
If research is faking it.
Yeah.
I would also add to all of that not only does it make mistakes, but this stuff is also quite expensive to not just train to actually get a model up and running, but even every time you ask it a question, that itself comes with a cost. We aren't paying for it if we're a free user or if we're paying maybe a monthly subscription. But in the background, there's actually significant costs that go into actually powering these models. And over time, this could really grow quite quickly. So it's not like we can just go and say, oh, this is a free tool we can implement everywhere and anywhere. Rather, it does still come with a cost. So I think that's also worth keeping in mind. So on the whole jobs front, I'm actually feeling quite good about that outlook. I would say, back to your question about sort of fears that I've seen, another is along this idea of like a loss of control, that people are sort of afraid of, an AI run amok, that for whatever reason it's able to disobey us and, go and get the nuclear launch codes or something like that and, cause all kinds of havoc. But I think that, to this point, we can rest assured that today we have hundreds of thousands of software engineers in the world that they have their jobs in many ways precisely because of how difficult it is to maintain technology, how we're always updating and changing things, and how one update may go and break something you may not even ever expect would be linked. And I think it's bold to assume that an AI would be able to navigate all of that environment while also dealing with the constraints of what abilities it actually has. If we're dealing with a chatbot, all it's able to do is write chat back to us. If we're dealing with an AI that has some, maybe control over how it routes, network traffic, it's not going to go and suddenly magically develop a kill switch and, maliciously hold on to that until just the right moment. So I still think that a lot of those ideas are more the results of Hollywood rather than, anything that is real world.
What about threats about cybersecurity?
I'm sorry?
Threats about cybersecurity and maybe misuse of personal information. Any fears kind of centered around that?
So I do think that there's some valid fears along cybersecurity. So there's sort of two buckets I put this into. Number one is that humans are still fallible, and that if we can have, for example, a phishing email that looks incredibly convincing written by one of these programs, and it is completely possible. I've done it. I'm ashamed to admit, not phishing, but
I sort of sent it. I've done it.
Oh, you sent me that email.
Yeah, sorry about that, Paul. No, but I do think that because these can seem ever more convincing and have fewer mistakes in them, it can make it more difficult to detect when there is a sort of potential cyber threat or malicious actor that's coming after you. For example, if you go and feed a model some contents of your social media profile, plus whatever phishing method you're trying to use, you could put together something that looks quite convincing. So that's actually a valid fear, I think, and people need to always be aware of exactly how these attacks can play out, so they can thwart them. So there's that angle. The other angle I would say is that these AI models, they're not just writing in text that us as humans can read and understand. It's also able to produce code. It can write programs. Now, of course, we need to give it instructions for what program to actually write. But if we could use an AI to, for example, explore all kinds of attack vectors for how to breach a system by sort of just creatively trying a variety of different things repeatedly until something works, that could be a new threat angle that we must be prepared to defend against. And that's where we have, cybersecurity solutions to repel those, right? And that's where we actually have a lot of cybersecurity companies that do exactly that they have these sorts of intelligent response, AI-driven softwares that are able to sort of think in the same kind of logic to be able to respond to new and emergent threats.
Back to your arms race you were mentioning.
Exactly. I think that a lot of this comes down to an arms race. We can think about that as well in terms of misinformation. There's a lot that goes on there as well. There can be misinformation, but at the other hand, we can also use AI to try to detect that.
What about on the benefits and opportunities side? Where you're seeing the wider application of AI, whether that's productivity or living conditions, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to be optimistic about here, but of course, always good to temper the optimism for exactly how this may play out. So I think that foremost among the possibilities here that I see in terms of benefits is how this can make us more productive in our economy. If we think of our hours worked and how much output we're able to generate from that, sort of at a very simplistic economics interpretation, that if we can make ourselves produce more output with the same number of hours, then we can all be better off because we would be able to have more production, more output to supply our economy. So if we take that, a few steps further, if we have somebody who is working a job where they're able to, gain, let's say 10 new sales a day, or they're able to, write, 100 lines of code, that if we're able to pair them with a generative AI capability that can actually make them able to do those things either better or faster, that we can expand the potential productivity of that worker. So if we scale that up to the sort of economy-wide view, then we can make our economy richer by having Gen AI partnered with us in our work streams. So really, I think that's quite exciting stuff, and there are some studies that have already looked at this. I would say probably one of the most appreciable areas where we see this is in software engineering, where if you pair some kind of tool that is able to kind of tackle common coding challenges or roadblocks, that you could sort of think of it like an autofill capability, rather than just sort of auto-completing a sentence, it's auto-completing lines of code for you.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you're able to sort of accomplish a given, software engineering task. I think it's like up to 40% faster when you actually have one of these tools paired alongside a software engineer. So that's, I think, an appreciable change. And again, if we scale that up, that could be huge. So if we can make ourselves more productive with Gen AI, then it could lead to things like better living conditions, and like I said, a richer economy. Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot there that I think that over the next 5, maybe more likely 10 to 15 years, where we actually see this develop incrementally and be implemented in a variety of different functions, that Gen AI may actually be able to meaningfully grow our economy over time. I would say that the last time we saw such an appreciable change in how productive people are in their jobs came during the software revolution from 95 to 2005. If we can repeat that, I think that would be fantastic news for the economy. Yeah. There's also other uses for AI, right? So it's not just Gen AI. There's also how we could, for example, enable self-driving cars, or speed up certain kinds of research, or maybe medical advancements. But I won't go too far into the details there.
Well, to touch on this, on the self-driving cars, because, we deal with our clients that have multiple generations, right? So yes, first of all, as a father of a 13-year-old, am I looking forward to self-driving cars? Yes, absolutely. But we also have lots of clients that have to have that discussion with their parents about when is the time to ask them to stop driving, right? To quote unquote, take the keys away. And that is a really difficult conversation to have, because you're talking about someone's independence and someone's freedom, and they're often see it as some sort of accusation of loss of acumen. So, that's a tough, but if there were self-driving cars, that would make that discussion a lot easier.
Oh, absolutely. I think that the technology for self-driving cars, it's close to being there. There's some cities that have, all sorts of pilot programs where you can actually see self-driving vehicle fleets. Yeah. But there's still issues with them. I would say that the two primary issues that I see with it is, number one, that when you actually are on the road, there's just so many variables to account for, that if you have a controlled environment, it can be, a pretty simplistic task. It's kind of like a flow chart almost. But then when you get to spaces where maybe you don't have a well-defined road, maybe it's not painted, maybe you have people going all different directions, pedestrians, and so on and so forth, it can become very difficult to account for all of that. And then you layer on top of it like weather conditions and visibility and so on and so forth. It gets very quickly very complicated. I would say the other factor is that a lot of self-driving technologies today sort of rely on kind of having a human element still on the road, that there is somebody to take initiative if you're in some kind of logjam. That if you're, let's say at a 4-way intersection, and you have 3 self-driving cars approaching it from 3 angles, and then a human approaching it from a 4th, you could assume that human will take the initiative to sort of figure out that log jam. Whereas those other cars, they may just sit there waiting on somebody to take action first, because they don't want to have some kind of safety malfunction where they get into an accident because they all decided to go at the same time because nobody would take initiative. So that's another sort of key challenge. But over time, this technology sure has developed more slowly than we could have hoped for, but it has still continued to develop. The fact that we have these things on the road at all, I think, is a testament to how far we've come. So, I don't want to call it quits on any of that. I actually think that there's still a case for optimism there.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I mean, my car has like a self-parking functionality, which I haven't used in the 3 years that I've owned my car because I'm a control freak.
No, say it isn't so.
So the thought, and quite admittedly, like I'm not a great parker, but I rather park myself than allow the vehicle to do its thing and park with precision.
I'll probably be one of those people with my hands on the wheel.
Exactly.
Like, you can do it, but with training wheels.
I trust you, but not that much.
Yeah.
Bad parking control freak.
Exactly. Ashley, you've spoken about AI affecting 3 broad categories of companies. Can you kind of touch on those different categories for us?
Sure. And I think that, there's many ways of slicing and dicing this, but I like to sort of simply approach it with 3 pretty broad buckets. And that is that we have the enablers of AI, so what may some refer to as the picks and shovels approach. Then we have another bucket, which is the adopters of AI, how we actually integrate this into the economy. And then we have the responders, so those problems that arise because of AI, how do we respond to them potentially with additional AI? So in the enablers bucket, just let's begin there. This is, I think, where we've seen a lot of the price action already. It is those tech companies that are building this software to begin with. It is those large treasure troves of data that are necessary to really make these things truly intelligent or perhaps differentiated. That we rely on that for really enabling these systems. And then as part of all of this, there's the hardware component. So we have a massive amount of semiconductors, so like these chips and in many cases video cards, these processors that are really specialized for this task of training AI models. You need a lot of computing power in order to make these things happen. And so I think the first area that we've really seen AI take off this year has been in semiconductors, precisely because of the huge amount of demand that goes into training these models, but also maintaining them. For example, every time you log into, for example, ChatGPT, and you ask it a question, there is compute that's going on to actually make that happen. So we need a lot of computing resources, those enablers for this AI, revolution, if you want to call it that, or trend, if you prefer, to really take off. Then on the adopters front, I think that we've sort of seen inklings of this emerging, but this is, again, those sorts of use cases that have been found to really integrate AI into a product or service or business model to either make things more efficient or to make a product better. That I think this is the area that we'll probably see maybe over the next 2, 3, maybe even 5 years to really be the key area of development for exactly how we see this rolled out into products. We've seen some early use cases already, for example, in some search engines that has been integrated as a feature to help understand your search results or parse them in a different way. But I think that that's really just the surface that we're scratching right now. I think there's so much more that we can do on that front. And then finally, again, the responders. We mentioned a bit of cybersecurity threats earlier. This is where I think we can really use AI to respond to these challenges that emerge because of AI. That, for example, and you may have heard of deepfakes as one challenge emerging from AI. And this is really about being able to record a video of yourself and use a video of somebody else to then take somebody else's likeness and voice and mannerisms and be able to create a video that is entirely your own production, but looks and sounds exactly like somebody else. And of course, this can sound quite scary quite quickly. Yeah. But in the same process, the exact same process that allows that video to be constructed, there are, again, these sorts of you could think of them as watermarks that allow an AI system to sort of detect that something's not right here, that this is actually a manufactured thing. This isn't a true original video. Rather, it's the output of some kind of algorithm. And so the fact that we can do that says that, again, there's that kind of AI arms race where we can use that kind of technology to respond to those new threats. So there's a whole lot more to be said on the responders category, but that's just one example of many to show that we can actually use these sorts of technologies that are at the same time the threat as a solution to it.
Right. And of those big sort of broad categories, are there sub-segments that you think, portfolios should be focusing on? Are there particular, hey, this is where it's going next?
So, I've laid out before that the sort of enablers, that sort of category has taken off first.
Yeah.
And I think that makes sense because we don't really know where all of this is going quite yet, but we know that there's a great deal of demand that is chasing exactly how we may construct these systems, whatever that end state may be. So that's feeding a lot of demand and price action there. But what takes root from there, I think that is anyone's guess. But as I noted, I think that's the adopters category of exactly how we roll this out into a product or service is something to be excited about. The area that's I'm curious about is how this is applied into sort of like biopharmaceuticals. So, for example, in biochemistry, you mentioned, Paul, that you have a brother who teaches biology. Yeah. There is a sort of grammar that goes into how exactly biochemistry works, right? And if we can have an AI model that's capable of understanding human language, why can't we then go and apply it as well to, for example, protein synthesis? And so there's actually a variety of models that have been developed exactly for that, to see exactly how we can approach biopharmaceutical research. So I think that that's one interesting area. I'm not going to go into and say that that's where we want to target, but I think that's one example of many of exactly how we may see this play out in other functions.
Well, and one of the examples that we were talking about earlier is just a little bit simpler than biochemistry is travel. I mean, and if you look at the evolution of travel, where we used to have travel agents, and that was really you either had to call the airlines yourself or you had to call a travel agent, and that was how you got access, and they knew they could shop the flights. Well, that kind of went away with the online flight shopping, and you can do comparisons yourself, where now as that evolves, you could actually say, look, I like a window seat. I like to leave at this time. And hey, this is where I'm going. What should I go see? And have it go research pages out and pull back. This is where most people like to go. And if this is the kind of experience you want to have, and it could book your trip for you.
Yeah, I think that's completely possible. And I think that what you sort of highlight there is an example of how we can get people to not just go online and fill out a form of exactly what kind of criteria they're looking for, but be able to speak to these sorts of tools or platforms in a way that they're using natural human language, sort of like you're talking to, like a customer service agent in a chat window, but it's able to do exactly what you just described by just specifying exactly what you're looking for.
Right.
So that's a one, I think smaller example of how we could apply this technology in a way that could be, about not just creating a flight itinerary, but also it could be about planning your whole vacation, right? Everything from ideas to, actually making the arrangements themselves.
Awesome.
So longer term questions. I mean, AI has evolved so much in the last 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. How do you think it's going to impact our economy in the future as it continues to evolve forward?
Sure. So I mentioned earlier about the productivity front, and I think that's where we can see appreciable gains over time.
Yeah.
That'll be sort of like a slow burn. I don't think that's going to be like an overnight sort of, wow, it popped in the figures, there's AI. Rather, I think it'll sort of build up over time. I've seen the sort of range of productivity estimates be sort of all over the place, everything from around 1% per year to 3.5% per year, which I think is nuts. if that were to happen, that'd be, I think fantastic for everybody, but I don't think that's quite likely. But I think that a good model that I've been using is to sort of think, again, back to the sort of the ICT or information communication technology revolution of 1995 to 2005. You can see that mark in US data that it really had an appreciable effect on productivity over time. That if we're able to do that again, if you remember like the 90s and early 2000s, that was a good time in the economy to be, in a growth stance. And I think, again, that comes back to what was going on in the background with increases in productivity, among other factors, of course. So if we can have something like that, using that as a model, that we could have an appreciable change in economic output that isn't just about, for example, how we approach growth in our economy from the perspective of just technological change more generally, or having more higher value added processes, for example, but rather that we're able to do all kinds of functions at a greater scale and at essentially a cheaper price. So a lot to be said there. I have some figures that I put together, but I won't bore you with all the details there. But I think you should have the paper that I wrote on that. It's sort of a fun thought experiment to go through. So I think it's a probably nerdy way of putting that. I think that there's a lot to be said here. And I do think that even the most pessimistic forecasts about what Gen AI may do still suggest a pretty appreciable effect on the economy over time.
Yeah. I mean, I going back to the adoption and how that's going to unfold, one example that we give to clients is when especially if they're in fear of jobs going away, we like to say, hey, TurboTax has been around for a really long time, but there are still plenty of CPAs. And we talk to CPAs all the time. There's some really good software out there, but it's a tool. It's not a replacement. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, and CPAs are using, very advanced tax software, but they're using it as an aid, not as a replacement. And it just allows them to do more time to research and how to do things more creatively or learn more about tax code and the changes and keep up with the changes.
I think that's a great point, Paul. And actually, that reminds me of one of my favorite things I've heard on this topic, which is there's somebody I was speaking to who described it as, I'm not scared of AI taking my job. I'm scared of somebody who is better at using AI taking my job. And I think that's exactly as your point. It's a tool, not a replacement. That it matters about how technologically savvy you are with these sorts of tools for that kind of change over time that is incremental, that can make you a better employee or a better person running your business or so on and so forth. So I think that therein lies, I think, the meat of this story, that it's just another tool that I think we can get accustomed to over time.
Awesome. So, and we need to let you get back to your tea, but
yeah, I'm due for a refill.
Yeah. Oh dear. Well, we really got no, but you've been super generous. But just to wrap up, what do you think is the next big phase of AI? What do you see as the next? Is there a chat GPT moment around the corner that we should expect some sort of future explosion, or where do you think that's going to be?
So I wish I had the sort of foresight to predict when that may be or what that may be. That would be fantastic. I'd probably quit my day job in that case. But I do think that what's next is about how we get, again, from that sort of proof of concept stage, which I think that in many ways we're sort of, maybe still 80% there and haven't yet moved away from that. How we get from that proof of concept to something that is really a truly remarkable change in how we're actually approaching, some kind of business process or work task or function that really, I think, makes a difference in how productive we are, how we actually get to those meaningful changes I was getting at, how we actually make that happen, right? So, maybe it's some huge product that comes out that is able to really wrap up this functionality in a nice, neat bow. I know that, for example, just integrating this into operating systems is already a goal for some of the major tech companies that they want to actually see this be a day-to-day capability that people can use in the same way that they may turn to a search engine. So I think that, there's those sorts of moments where we have this rolled out into products that, maybe we just need a sort of moment that we didn't yet think of, that is beyond the examples I already gave, that actually has an appreciable impact beyond just, wow, this is cool, but also just, wow, this is helpful, right?
Yeah. Awesome.
Definitely.
Ashley,
Thanks, Ashley, so much for being here. We are so lucky to have you. And you mentioned your white paper series, 4-part series, fantastic information. If any listeners are interested in getting their hands on it, we're happy to share that with anybody. Just reach out.
It was
that sounds great.
A good amount of work and really well written.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for having me as well. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you.
So that's our episode for today. Thank you for listening. If you found this topic interesting or useful, please let us know. Or if there are other topics you'd like us to address, let us know that too. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for being invested.
The RAND Group is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Some investment professionals may also be registered with Hightower Securities, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities, LLC. This is not an offer to buy or sell securities. No investment process is free of risk, and there is no guarantee that the investment process or the investment opportunities referenced herein will be profitable. Past performance is neither indicative nor a guarantee of future results. The investment opportunities referenced herein may not be suitable for all investors. All data or other information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Any opinions, news, research, analysis, prices, or other data information contained in this presentation is provided as general market commentary and does not constitute investment advice. The RAND Group and Hightower Advisors, LLC, or any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties express or implied as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for the statements or errors or omissions or results obtained from the use of this information. The RAND Group and Hightower Advisors, LLC assume no liability for any action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to this information. The information is provided as of the date referenced in the document. Such data and other information are subject to change without notice. This document was created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of the author and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors, LLC, or any of its affiliates.